The air in my living room was thick with the scent of sugar flowers and expensive perfume, a cloying sweetness that clung to the back of my throat. Sunlight, the kind that only exists in late afternoon, streamed through the large bay window, catching dust motes dancing above the heads of my friends and family. Laughter bubbled up from the sofa where my sister, Beatrice, was telling some exaggerated story about my childhood, her hands flying dramatically. Every surface was polished to a high shine, the silver tea set gleaming, the crystal glasses twinkling, a perfect tableau of modern domestic bliss. It was a scene I had meticulously crafted, a performance of happiness for my daughter-in-law, Chloe. But beneath the veneer of chatter and clinking china, a low thrum of anxiety pulsed in my veins. This was the moment I had been anticipating and dreading in equal measure. The gift. My gift. For months, my world had shrunk to the four corners of that quilt. While Marcus worked late and Chloe curated her Instagram life, my fingers had worked the needle and thread, stitching together not just fabric, but pieces of myself. I had chosen the softest flannels, the most vibrant cottons. A swatch from Marcus's first Little League uniform, a faded floral from my own mother's favorite apron, a deep blue batik that reminded me of a long-ago trip to the coast with my late husband. Each square was a memory, a prayer, a hope for the grandchild who would soon lie beneath it. I had imagined Chloe's face, not with ecstatic joy, perhaps, but with a soft recognition, an understanding of the weight of the offering. I am a fool. "Eleanor, you have outdone yourself," my dear friend, Margaret, whispered, leaning close. Her eyes, kind and crinkled at the corners, held a genuine warmth that momentarily steadied me. "The house is beautiful." "It is just a gathering," I said, but I squeezed her hand in gratitude. My eyes scanned the room, past Beatrice's animated face, past the younger cousins sipping sparkling cider, and landed on Chloe. She was holding court by the fireplace, one hand resting on the pronounced curve of her belly, the other gesturing with a champagne flute filled with juice. She was radiant, there was no denying it. Her blonde hair was a perfect sheet of silk, her maternity dress a simple, shockingly expensive sheath of cream-colored linen. She was a statue of modern motherhood, beautiful and cool and remote. And beside her, my son Marcus beamed with a pride so pure it almost hurt to look at. He was caught in her orbit, as he had been since the day they met, a gentle planet revolving around a brilliant, demanding sun. "All right, everyone," Marcus announced, his voice cutting through the pleasant din. He clinked his fork against his glass. "I think it is time for the main event. Mom, are you ready?" All eyes turned to me, the air shifted, the laughter subsiding into an expectant hush. I felt a flush creep up my neck. This was it. I forced a smile when I hoped conveyed a serenity I did not feel. "I am." I walked to the hall closet, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The quilt was folded inside a box I had lined with tissue paper. As I lifted it, the weight of it felt immense, not of fabric and batting, but of history and expectation. I carried it back into the living room, a strange procession of one, and placed the box on the coffee table before Chloe. "For you," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "For both of you, and for the baby." Chloe's smile was a practice thing, a perfect curve of pink lipstick. "Eleanor, you really should not have." Her tone was light, but her eyes flickered over the plain box with a hint of appraisal, already judging the packaging. "Open it, Chloe," Marcus urged, his hand on her shoulder. She made a show of it, carefully sliding off the ribbon, peeling back the tissue paper with her manicured fingers. The room was silent, everyone leaning forward. When she finally pulled the quilt free, it unfolded in a cascade of color and texture. A soft murmur of appreciation rippled through the guests. I held my breath. The quilt was beautiful. I knew it was. The pattern was a complex starry night, dark blues and silvers surrounding a bright, sun-yellow center, representing the new life coming into our world. The stitching was tiny, precise, each not a testament to hours spent under the lamplight, the radio playing softly in the background. Chloe held it up, her expression unreadable. She did not exclaim. She did not run her fingers over the intricate embroidery. She simply looked at it, her head tilted. The silence stretched, becoming heavy, uncomfortable. "Oh," she said, and the word dropped into the room like a stone. "It is homemade." The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I felt the words like a physical blow, a sharp, cold needle straight to my heart. My smile froze on my face. She continued, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that was more brutal than any outright insult. How vintage! She gave a little laugh, a tinkling, hollow sound that was not echoed by anyone else. It is very thoughtful, Eleanor, really, a true heirloom. Vintage? She made it sound like a relic, a dusty, outdated thing to be stored in an attic. Not a blanket for her precious, modern child. Not a piece of my heart offered up for their future. The nervous laughter that finally came from a few of her friends was brittle and short-lived. It was the sound of social panic, of people not knowing where to look. I saw Margaret's face fall, her hand fly to her mouth. I saw Beatrice glare at Chloe, her nostrils flaring. But I could not look away from my daughter-in-law. Her smile was still fixed in place, but her eyes were cold, already dismissing the quilt, dismissing me. The joyous atmosphere I had worked so hard to create evaporated, replaced by a thick, tense silence. The vibrant room suddenly felt garish and false. I could feel the heat of my humiliation spreading across my cheeks. My pride, a thing I had always held close, felt flayed open, raw and bleeding in front of everyone I loved. This was not a simple slight. It was a public execution of my affection. Marcus, my dear, oblivious Marcus, finally stirred. "Wow, Mom," he said, his voice too loud, too cheerful for the stillness. "This is incredible. Look at all this detail. Chloe, is it not incredible, the work that must have gone into this?" He reached out and touched a corner of the quilt, his fingers tracing a star. "Remember that blue, honey, from my old uniform?" He was trying, my boy. He was trying to build a bridge over the chasm his wife had just blasted open. But his words only made it worse. They highlighted the rift, emphasized how completely Chloe stood on the other side, unwilling to cross. Chloe did not even look at him. Her gaze was still on me, and in that moment I saw it clearly. It was not just about a quilt. It was a declaration. A delineation of her world from mine. Her world of sleek, store-bought perfection, and my world of sentimental, handmade clutter. "It is certainly one of a kind," Chloe said, her tone final. She began to fold the quilt, not with care, but with a brisk, efficient motion, as if tidying up a mess. She placed it back in the box and pushed it slightly to the side, making room for the next, doubtlessly more fashionable, gift. The conversation attempted to restart, stuttering and forced. People spoke a little too quickly, laughed a little too loudly. The party continued, but the heart of it had stopped. I stood there, a statue of a mother, my offering rejected and set aside. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Margaret. "Eleanor," she murmured, her eyes full of a pity that was almost as painful as the insult. "It is breathtaking. She does not understand." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat was too tight. I looked at Marcus, who was now whispering something to Chloe, his brow furrowed in concern. She waved a dismissive hand, a slight, impatient flick of her wrist. And in that small, casual gesture, I saw the future. I saw all the Christmases, the birthdays, the milestones of my grandchild's life where I would be on the outside, my love deemed too vintage, too homemade to be acceptable. The love I had poured into every stitch was now a symbol of everything I was that she did not want to be. The room was still full of people, but I had never felt more alone. The celebration was over, and something else had begun, something cold and sharp that settled deep in my bones, a chill that I knew would not easily leave me. The rain started as I ran, a fine, cold mist that matched the static numbness in my head. I do not remember driving to Ruth's house. I remember only the blur of wet streets, the frantic swish of the windshield wipers, and the feeling that my own skin did not fit me anymore. Chloe's voice played on a loop in my mind, a sharp, mocking record. "It is just an old blanket." Each repetition was a fresh cut. I had built a life, a home, on what I thought was a foundation of shared history and respect. Now, it felt as flimsy and insubstantial as tissue paper. I pulled into my sister's driveway, the tires crunching over the gravel. Her house has always been a sanctuary, a sturdy, brick-faced haven with a garden that, even in the fading autumn light, held the ghost of summer's color. A light was on in the living room, a soft, golden beacon against the gray afternoon. I sat for a moment in the car, the engine ticking as it cooled, listening to the rain patter on the roof. I did not want to bring my storm into her calm, but I had nowhere else to go. The front door swung open before I could even knock. Ruth stood there, her face immediately creased with concern. She is 10 years my senior, and in that moment she looked every bit the protective older sister she has always been. Her hair, the same shade of brown as mine but threaded with silver, was pulled back in a loose bun, and she wore her favorite worn-out cardigan. "Eleanor," she said, her voice soft but firm, "you are soaked, come in." She did not ask what was wrong. She simply took my wet coat, guided me into the living room, and sat me down on the large, comfortable sofa that has been in her home for as long as I can remember. The room smelled of lemon polish and old books. It was a smell I associated with safety. "I will get you some tea," she said, and disappeared into the kitchen. I looked around the room, trying to anchor myself. My eyes fell on a photograph on the mantelpiece. It was a picture of the three of us, Ruth, me as a gangly teenager, and Mom, our mother. She was smiling, her arms around both of us. It was a good memory, a happy one. But now, looking at her kind face, all I could feel was a new, confusing sense of betrayal. How could the woman who raised me, who kissed my scraped knees and taught me how to bake, have been part of something that now felt like a lie? The quilt was her gift to me. Was that not true? Ruth returned with 2 steaming mugs. She handed one to me and sat beside me, her body angled toward mine, waiting. She knew I would talk when I was ready. The warmth of the mug seeped into my cold hands. I stared into the amber liquid, gathering the words that felt like shards of glass in my throat. "It is Chloe," I finally whispered, my voice hoarse. "We had a terrible fight." I told her everything. The words tumbled out, disjointed and raw. I described the party, the pride I had felt in displaying the quilt, the way my friends had admired it. Then I recounted Chloe's arrival, her dismissive comment, my attempt to explain its importance, and her final, devastating blow. "You are so dramatic, Mom. It is just an old blanket. You would think it was made from gold the way you go on about it." When I finished, a heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I expected Ruth to be angry, to condemn Chloe's disrespect immediately. But she was not. Instead, a profound sadness settled over her features. She looked older, weary, as if I had awakened a ghost she had long tried to keep asleep. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, her voice thick with an emotion I could not quite name. It was more than sympathy. It was grief. "You do not understand. You cannot understand what that quilt truly is." "What do you mean?" I asked, a new, different kind of dread beginning to uncoil in my stomach. "It was Mom's. She made it. She gave it to me. That is the truth." Ruth shook her head slowly, her eyes glistening. She reached out and took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "No, Eleanor, that is not the truth. It is the story we were told to tell you. A story to protect you." The room seemed to tilt. The familiar smells, the comforting sights, all receded into a distant buzz. Protect me from what? She took a deep, shuddering breath, as if steeling herself for a dive into deep, cold water. "The woman you called Mom, she was your aunt, your mother's older sister." The words did not make sense. They were sounds, empty of meaning. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, for the moment she would tell me she was joking. But her expression was one of absolute, painful sincerity. "My aunt," I repeated, the words foreign on my tongue. "Yes," Ruth said softly. "Your biological mother, her name was Clara. She was so full of life, artistic like you. She made that quilt." My eyes flickered toward the bedroom where my suitcase lay, where the quilt was folded away, now feeling like a foreign object. "She made it." "She made it for you," Ruth continued, her voice gaining a little strength, as if the telling, once begun, had to be finished. "She stitched it while she was pregnant with you. Every square, every thread, it was a labor of love, a story for the daughter she would never get to raise." The air left my lungs. Never get to raise. What happened to her? My question was a mere breath. "She died," Ruth said, the words simple and final and devastating. "Just a few days after you were born, there were complications. It was very sudden." She squeezed my hand tighter. "Mom, your aunt, she took you in. She loved you as her own from the very first day. We all did, but she was afraid. Afraid that knowing you had lost your real mother would be a burden, a shadow over your childhood. So she decided to raise you as her daughter. The quilt, it was the only thing Clara left for you. Mom gave it to you on your 16th birthday, but she could not bear to tell you its true story. She thought it would confuse you, hurt you. So she said she had made it. It was a lie born of love, Eleanor. A terrible, complicated lie." I pulled my hand away from hers, standing up abruptly. The mug of tea tipped, spilling a dark pool onto the rug, but I did not notice. I paced the length of the room, my mind racing, trying to rearrange the entire landscape of my life. The woman whose photograph smiled from the mantelpiece was not my mother. My mother was a ghost named Clara, a woman who existed only in stitches of thread on a quilt I had cherished under a false pretense. The heirloom I had defended with such fervor was not a symbol of the mother I knew, but a message from a mother I never knew. And Chloe, my own daughter, had unknowingly mocked the most sacred relic of my very existence. I stopped pacing and turned to face Ruth, my body trembling. "All this time," I said, my voice shaking with a fury that was directed at no one and everyone. "All this time you knew who I was, where I came from, and you said nothing." "It was not my secret to tell," Ruth pleaded, her own tears falling now. "Mom made me promise. She believed she was doing what was best for you." "Best for me?" The words were a bitter laugh. "To live my entire life not knowing my own story, to have my daughter ridicule the only piece of my real mother I will ever have." I walked to the mantelpiece and picked up the photograph. The face of the woman I had called Mom now looked like a stranger's, her smile seeming like a mask for a great deception. "Who am I, Ruth? If she is not my mother, then who am I?" I looked from the photograph in my hand to my sister's anguished face, and a new, chilling thought crystallized in the chaos of my mind. My voice dropped to a whisper. "Ruth," I said, "if she was my aunt, then what are you?" Ruth met my gaze, her eyes filled with a lifetime of withheld truths. The silence that followed was heavier than any that had come before, and in that silence, I felt the foundation of my world crack open into an abyss I never knew was there. The silence in the room was a physical presence, thick and heavy, broken only by the frantic beating of my own heart. Marcus and Chloe stood frozen before me, their faces a canvas of confusion and dawning alarm. The quilt, my mother's quilt, was a vibrant, accusing weight in my hands. I could feel the prickle of every stitch against my skin, a million tiny testaments to a love I never knew. I did not look at them. My eyes were fixed on the fabric, on the story woven into its very fibers. The words, when they finally came, did not feel like my own. They were dredged up from a place deep within me, a well of grief I had not known existed. "You wanted to know why an old blanket could make me so upset," I began, my voice a low, trembling thing. "It is because this is not a blanket. It is a biography." I saw Marcus take a half step forward, his brow furrowed in that familiar, protective way. "Mom, what are you talking about? You are scaring us." "I am scared, Marcus," I whispered, my gaze still locked on the quilt. "I am terrified of what I have just learned. A lifetime of not knowing." I forced myself to look up to meet their eyes, the concern in Marcus's, the impatient confusion in Chloe's. It was the impatience that gave me the strength to continue, that hardened the sorrow into something sharper, angrier. "My entire life," I said, my voice gaining strength, becoming raw, "I believed I was given up, that my birth mother did not want me. It was a simple, painful story I learned to accept. The closed adoption, the silence, it was just the way things were." I unfolded the quilt, holding it up so they could see the intricate patterns, the careful, loving work. "But this tells a different story, her story." Chloe shifted her weight, a flicker of unease crossing her features. Who is her?" "Sarah," I said the name aloud for the first time, and it felt like a sacred invocation. "Her name was Sarah. She did not give me away. She loved me. She wanted me." My throat tightened. "She was young, and her family, they forced her. They sent her away to have the baby in secret, and they took me from her the moment I was born. They told her it was for the best, that it was the only way." I pointed a shaking finger at the center of the quilt at the stitched date of my birth. "She made this for me. In the months after I was taken, in her grief, she poured all of her love, all of her loss into this. Every stitch is a tear she cried. Every patch is a piece of the life she dreamed for us." My anger finally broke through, hot and sharp. "And you, Chloe, you wanted to cut it up for a Halloween costume. You called it kitschy." The color drained from Chloe's face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Marcus stared at me, his expression shifting from concern to a horrified comprehension. "Mom," he breathed, how do you know all this?" "She wrote it down," I said, my voice cracking. I carefully turned the quilt over and pointed to the corner where I had found the tiny, hidden pocket, the fragile, aged paper within. "She sewed a letter into the lining, a letter to me. She wrote about her hopes, her love. She wrote about the family that tore us apart. She begged whoever found me to tell me that she never, ever wanted to let me go." A sob escaped me, ragged and unbidden. I found it tonight. While you were laughing about your costume, I was discovering my mother for the first time. The room was utterly still. Chloe's hands had flown to her mouth. Her eyes, usually so bright and self-assured, were wide with a dawning, awful understanding. The superficial world she inhabited, where heirlooms were judged by their aesthetic value and history, was something to be curated for effect, had just been shattered. The weight of her unintentional cruelty, of her casual dismissal of a profound tragedy, settled upon her visibly. Her shoulders slumped. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. I did not know, I could not have known." She shook her head, tears beginning to trace paths through her perfect makeup. "I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. What I said, it was thoughtless. It was cruel. I would never if I had known," she broke off, unable to continue, her apology a genuine, tearful offering. Marcus was not looking at Chloe. He was looking at me, and the pain in his eyes was a different kind. It was the pain of a son who has just realized he has failed in his most fundamental duty. "All this time," he said, his voice low and strained, "all this time you carried that pain alone, and I never asked, I never pushed. I accepted the story because it was easier." He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration directed inward. "I should have protected you from this. I should have been someone you could talk to." "You could not have protected me from a truth you did not know existed, Marcus," I said, my anger receding, leaving only a vast, weary sadness. "I did not know it existed. I lived a lie. A comfortable lie, perhaps, but a lie nonetheless. My whole identity was built on a foundation of someone else's shame and secrecy." I let the quilt settle gently onto the sofa between us, a silent, powerful witness. "This changes nothing, and it changes everything," I said, more to myself than to them. "I am still the woman you know, but I am also Sarah's daughter. And knowing that, it fills a hollow space I have always had but could never name. It is a painful fullness, but it is fullness nonetheless." We stood there, the three of us, bound together by this new, painful knowledge. The air was thick with unspoken apologies and shattered assumptions. The family we had been an hour ago was gone, replaced by this new, more fragile configuration. It was Chloe who moved first. She did not approach me, but she knelt down beside the sofa, her eyes on the quilt. She reached out a hand, but stopped short of touching it, as if it were too holy to be handled. "It is beautiful," she said softly, and this time the word held reverence, not judgment. "The work is incredible. She must have loved you so much." And in that moment, hearing those words from her, a small, hard knot of ice in my heart began to thaw. Marcus came and stood beside me, not touching me, but his presence was a solid comfort. He looked at the quilt, then at me. "What do you want to do, Mom?" he asked, his voice gentle. "What happens now?" I did not have an answer. There was no simple fix, no magic spell to erase the hurt. The path forward was uncharted. But as I looked from my son's worried face to my daughter-in-law's tear-streaked one, I felt a fragile sense of possibility. The bonds were frayed, stretched taut by the tension of the evening, but they were not broken. Perhaps they were stronger for having been tested. "Now," I said, my voice exhausted but clear, "we begin to understand. That is all we can do." I carefully folded the quilt, my movements slow and deliberate. I held it to my chest, not as a shield but as an anchor. The revelation was a wound that would never fully heal, but for the first time, I felt I had the truth to help me bear the scar. The family would mend, slowly, tentatively, with this quilt as a solemn reminder of all that had been lost and all that could still be saved. But as I turned to leave the room, a final, chilling thought whispered in the back of my mind. The letter had mentioned a name, the family that had orchestrated it all. My family. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that my search was not over. It was only just beginning.